Welcome to 21st Sports, and we're talking the Oakland Raiders at the Baltimore Ravens in their Week 4 matchup played October 2nd, 2016. And what a wild game this was. It came all the way down to the wire. It looked like it could have went either way. The Raiders were in control early on, but Baltimore making that late push, taking the late lead, only to have the victory slip away, and they were handed their first loss of the season by the Raiders. And it all got started off when Derek Carr hit Seth Roberts for a 6-yard touchdown pass to put the first points on the scoreboard in the closing moments of the first quarter with less than 90 seconds left in the first to make it 7-0 Oakland over Baltimore. Then in the second, the Ravens were all the way down on the 5-yard line, but they were forced to settle for a 24-yard field goal by Justin Tucker as they put their first points on the board, and it was 7-3. But those 4 points they left on the field there would come back to bite them. But later on in the second quarter, Derek Carr threw his second touchdown pass of the game. This one to Michael Crabtree, a 5-yard touchdown pass that made it 14-3. As I said, the Raiders in control early. And then Justin Tucker in the closing seconds of the first half hit a 43-yard field goal, and that made it 14-6 at halftime. So then coming out of the half, the Raiders in the lead by 8. But in the third quarter, the only score we saw was a 1-yard touchdown run by Joe Flacco. They went for 2. The 2-point conversion failed, and so it remained a 2-point lead for the Raiders. So the Ravens going for the tie, but instead it was 14-12. Oakland up by 2 heading into the fourth. Then Derek Carr hit Michael Crabtree as they connected for their second touchdown. Carr's third of the game, Crabtree's second. This one a 13-yard touchdown, and it was 21-12. But then the Ravens, Joe Flacco hit Steve Smith. Steve Smith making some moves, and he goes 52 yards for the touchdown. And it was back to a 2-point game with the score Oakland 21, Baltimore 19. And then we had a forced fumble, and the Ravens get the ball back as Lawrence Guy forces the fumble. Washington with the fumble. The Ravens get the ball. They're set up right there on the doorstep, and Terrence West punches it in, a 3-yard touchdown, and they go for 2. Flacco hits Mike Wallace, and now it's 27-21 as the Ravens took their first lead of the game with just over 3.5 minutes left in regulation. So the Ravens pulling off the fourth quarter comeback with a pair of touchdowns, also capitalizing off of that turnover. But then here comes the Raiders. Derek Carr, his 4th touchdown of the game, his 3rd to Michael Crabtree. And Michael Crabtree with the toe drag, keeping it in bounds for a 23-yard touchdown. And that gave the Raiders the lead 28-27 with the extra point by Janikowski. And that 1-point lead would be all that the Raiders would need as they hold on to win this one 28-27. So the Ravens lose their first game of the season. The Raiders with the big win on the road. They're now 3-1. Both teams are 3-1 at this point after 4 weeks of play. And the Raiders, they said early on they were in control. They let the lead slip out of their hands. It's just like the ball did there that led to the go-ahead touchdown. But Derek Carr throwing his 4th touchdown of the game, coming up clutch. Not big numbers yard-wise, but he got those 4 touchdowns. And the Raiders very efficient in the red zone. But Derek Carr 25 for 35, 199 passing yards, 4 touchdowns. On the ground, Washington just 5 carries for 30 yards. And Michael Crabtree had 7 receptions for 88 yards and 3 touchdowns. For the Ravens, Joe Flacco, 32 for 52, 298 passing yards, 1 touchdown. Terrence West, 21 carries for 113 yards and a touchdown. And Steve Smith, 8 receptions for 111 yards and a touchdown for the Ravens. This is a tight game. If you actually look at the numbers, most of the numbers favored the Ravens in this one. But James with a forced fumble for the Raiders, and Khalil Mack had a sack. Bruce Irvin with a sack and a forced fumble as well. And for the Raiders, Guy with a forced fumble. Then we look at the first downs, 25-13 in favor of Baltimore. Then we look at third downs, 5 for 17, 29% for the Ravens, and just 3 for 12, 25% conversion rate for the Raiders. So we look at fourth downs, actually, the Ravens 1 for 250% total net yards, 412 to 261 in favor of Baltimore. And we look at the penalties, a lot of penalties in this game. These two teams combined for 22 penalties and over 200 penalty yards, or just under 200 actually at 198. But it was 10 penalties against the Ravens for 105 yards, 12 penalties against the Raiders for 93 yards. The Raiders had a fumble, which they did lose. The Ravens had 3 fumbles, but they only lost 1. They recovered 2 of their own fumbles. But in the red zone, though, the Raiders 3 for 3, 100% in the red zone. And the Ravens, the Baltimore Ravens, 2 for 3, 66% in the red zone. And that's what I mentioned earlier when they had to settle for that 24-yard field goal, their first score of the game for the Ravens, when they were right there on the 5-yard line on 4th and 4, but they couldn't get the touchdown. They had to settle for the field goal. At that point, it was 7-3, but those 4 points that they left on the field at that moment, that would come back to cost them the victory in the end, as they lost by 1. So if they would have had those 4 points, they would have been up by 3. Of course, who knows what would have happened there. They would have changed the whole dynamics of the game. But when you look back and you see that, you got to convert those red zone opportunities into touchdowns. And if you have to settle for a short field goal, like I said, in a close game like this, that could be the difference. As everything else, if you see statistically speaking anyway, pretty much it all favored the Ravens. They actually, on the paper, you would have thought they would have won this one. Even time of possession, 34 minutes, 44 seconds for the Ravens, 25 minutes, 16 seconds for the Raiders. But see, that's the thing, is the Raiders, they took advantage of their opportunities, and they came up clutch and made the plays when they needed them the most. And that was Derek Carr coming up big time, those 4 touchdowns. He said he didn't even have 200 yards passing, but 4 touchdowns. He put the points on the board. And, of course, he got a lot of help from Crabtree, as Crabtree having a big game, 3 touchdowns. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Which plays and performances stuck out to you? Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It is greatly appreciated. I hope you had a good day and had a great weekend and enjoyed all the sports.